Welcome to our virtual discussion today entitled Project versus Strategy Planning, How to Prioritize Strategically Tactical Goals. This is a really important conversation that we have internally at our organization, but we also have it on many occasions with our clients. And so we wanted to present it to all of you today. So my name is Nellie Miller, and I am the Director of Marketing at MPOWR, and we're delighted to have you join us. A few housekeeping logistics before we begin. Again, there's the chat, and I see that we've got some locations coming in. So we've got Illinois, California, and British Columbia. Welcome. We're delighted to have you. Keep using the chat. We'd love to see where you're watching from. So again, you can ask a question or share an observation that I will share with our panelists today. You will receive a recording after today's presentation, so you can share it with colleagues who may not have been able to join us and also watch it on demand at your choosing. And we have other virtual discussions coming up in our current series, which is called A Culture of Strategy Execution. So I'll share more about that at the end of our presentation. So joining us today are some colleagues, and you may recognize their faces, and I'm delighted to introduce them. The first is Andrea Gibbs, our Senior Strategy Executive. Andrea has more than 2 decades of helping facilitate planning sessions, working with clients to help create a business plan that is motivational and achievable. In addition to teaching students at the graduate business level about the importance of solid communication and team collaboration, she is a big believer in the effect of culture on an organization and works with every client to understand their unique capabilities and goals. Hi, Andrea, welcome.
Hi, Nellie. Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
And also joining us is Jeff Fahrenwald, our VP of Strategy Development and Execution. In this role, Jeff is responsible for working with the entire senior leadership team to develop and guide the strategic direction of all of MPOWR's interests, as well as the interests of Supply Corps Inc., MPOWR's sister company. Jeff has extensive experience working with for-profit and not-for-profit businesses, as well as manufacturing, distribution, and service organizations in facilitating strategy planning. Before taking his current role at MPOWR and Supply Corps, Jeff was an assistant professor of business and the MBA director at Rockford University. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, good to see you, Nellie.
Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And also, you see Brittany Ray's face, our wonderfully talented digital marketing specialist. She knows everything digital and is helping us produce today's event. So thank you, Brittany, for all of your work behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and get started in regards to today's conversation. Jeff, I'm going to ask you to kick us off and really set the tone for what are strategically tactical goals. What does it mean to have those?
Sure. Well, from a planning perspective, if you think about it, tactics are the next step that will take to get out of the situation you're in. Whatever you're in, the next thing you're going to do. It's the move, hopefully, that helps you move forward. Strategy, on the other hand, is what you're doing deliberately to either avoid or get into the situation you're moving to. So it's a longer term strategy to think about it. If you want an example, if you think about a game of chess, if you are just not very good at chess and what's happening is someone makes a move and then you make a move in response, that's not strategically tactical. It's just a tactical move you're making. But if you have a plan when you're going into a game of chess and you're thinking about, this is the move, this is where I want to get to, and this is the way I think I'm going to try to win, and then you're also reacting to what's going on in the environment, and in that case the players you're playing against, that would be strategically tactical, keeping in mind what you're trying to accomplish and making the correct moves one after another that will help you get there, and considering what's going in the environment around you.
So it sounds like, Jeff, it's really about the end game, knowing where you're going. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Knowing where you're going and making sure that you're taking the right steps to get there, and making sure that you're also keeping your eye on what other people are doing at the same time.
Okay. Andre, what's your perspective?
Well, I like to think of strategically tactical in an example that I had with a client I worked with. They were a manufacturer who was very, very invested in the aerospace industry. This is pre-pandemic and slowdown of travel. So, but they were heavily invested in aerospace, and they knew that irrespective of the fact that they were successful at that moment, that being over leveraged in one industry probably wasn't a good strategy long term. And so they did the strategically tactical move of putting together a marketing and sales effort that would appeal to customers in other industries, in particular automotive, which is obviously a kind of a parallel industry that you can run with aerospace. So I thought of that as I think of that particular instance as strategically tactical. They're doing something tactical, such as their marketing plan and their marketing materials. They're orienting them to a new industry that's going to help shape their future to the positive in the long run. So that to me is strategically tactical.
Great. Well, thanks for that example. I certainly appreciate it, having been in marketing for so long. So thank you for that. Okay, we are now going to all ask you all a question, as we want to understand kind of where you are on this topic. So we're going to put up a poll question, and you'll see it come up on your screens. And so you can actually answer. We'd love to see your answers, and we'll share the aggregated answers in just a moment. So the first question: do your daily activities contribute to your strategic goals? Do they frequently, sometimes, or never contribute to your strategic goals? We'll go ahead and take a moment and wait as people answer.
I'm looking forward to seeing this result.
Yeah. Okay, it looks like 44% have answered frequently.
Kind of a split.
Yeah, and 56% have answered sometimes. Jeff, what's your take on these answers?
Well, I'm glad there weren't a lot of nevers, or there wasn't an open-ended question that where people could fill out and say, I'm not even sure what my strategic goals are. Because in some organizations you run into that, where people are like, what are our strategic goals? So it's kind of nice that there is that split. I think in some cases this happens because of your role in the organization. You know, depending on where you are in the organization, the more senior you are, the easier it is to understand what you're doing is moving towards things that are strategic. If you're at a more customer end of the organization, what you're doing, it may be harder to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
It can also it's also tied to, are you directly tied to the customer, or are you a support service in some way? And so it may be harder for you to see what the strategic goals are. So that makes some good sense.
At some point, though, every position should be contributing at some level, obviously varying degrees, to an organization's strategy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We have in our organization, we have what we call drivers. Other people call them key success factors. And we talk to everybody in our organization about that they should be able to see their job in our drivers, in our key success factors. Because if they don't, then there's no way they're going to be able to have daily work that's connected to strategic goals.
Well, and that's how you make a strategic vision happen too, is when everybody's involved.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, let's move on to our second question for all of you, our viewers. It's on the screen, and you'll see it pop up also in a separate tab for you to answer. But how often are you working on things that are not related to your strategic goals? Frequently, sometimes, or never? And we'll just take a moment as people answer. Okay, so we have a little bit of everything. 14% answered frequently, 79% said sometimes, and 7% said never. So this time, Andrea, I'm going to pass to you to kind of reflect on these responses.
Well, there's a little bit of a different distribution, and I think some of that might have to do with, when everybody got into this work from home environment with COVID, it forced a lot of organizations to think almost purely operationally for the first 3 months. Does everybody have the computer support they need? Do they have the bandwidth? Do they have the equipment to get their jobs done? What's it like working at the kitchen table? How are you doing? It was kind of crazy for a while, kind of crazy making, and survival of the organization was on the minds for many people, not only the leaders, but everybody else that worked for the organization. And I think in general, that kind of pulled us away from envisioning our future. We were just trying to manage the environment as it was at the time. And I think it pulled us away from not only envisioning the future, but taking steps to move toward it. So these answers don't completely surprise me.
I think it's also important to note that people want to feel like they're accomplishing something. And the more you're working on things that are strategic in nature, the harder it is sometimes to see what you're accomplishing at that moment. When I think about work things that I do that are strategic, I do a lot of seed planting. I start a lot of things that won't come to fruition for much later. But that means at the end of the day, when you look back at your day, you say, I was busy all day, but I'm not sure what I accomplished. And we do like to be able to feel like we're accomplishing something. And you may not be doing that if you're really working on in the short run. You may not be doing it if you're working on your strategic goals.
I think that's totally true, Jeff. I think by nature as a species, we're doers. We want to get things done, and getting things done tends to be operational. So I think that manifests in let's get stuff done. Let's check off the list, you know.
One of the things I always tell people, I really like in the summer when we have, when we can get outside, I really like pulling weeds. It sounds really strange, but at the end of the day, I can see what I accomplished, and that's so much different than what I do in my job normally, when a lot of times what I accomplish happens much, much further down the line.
Well, Jeff, I would love for you to come over to my yard and pull weeds. Are you, can I hire you? Can we talk
Probably
about this?
not.
Okay. Well, James has posted to all of us, as a project manager, I often feel that I'm stuck in the loop of maintaining the current project goals and less focused on the strategic planning of future projects or company strategy for future projects. So what's your reaction to his comment?
In my role, our PMO office actually reports to me. And when I talk to our manager of our PMO, she feels the same way a lot of times. And what really helps is that her and I'll have the discussion, and we'll talk about what is it you can be doing to help pull people along. And so I'll be coaching her to make sure that we connect in things. So, for instance, we may be doing an implementation of a new contract, and I make sure that she's talking to people about how is this contract fitting into other sorts of things that we're doing. But it really, in those cases, it takes support from other people to help encourage that in some ways, because that's a really tough position to be in.
Yes, well, thank you, James, for that comment. And again, to everyone else, please feel free to use our chat as we continue with our conversation. So I think we're going to touch on some things that you just mentioned, and thank you to all of you for answering our questions as we proceed with today's conversation. So we really want to get to the heart of our conversation. And so we want to take you through strategy execution versus project execution and how they're different, but there's also an interrelated relationship, so we can touch on that. And then, is one more important than the other? So Andrea, why don't you kick us off with project management?
Well, to kind of go along with the question we had from James, was it?
Yes.
James, I totally get where you're coming from. I've been in organizations where I have been responsible for very project oriented things. And I think it's important to understand that project management is still very important. It ensures progress as we move along in the organization in order to keep the organization properly running. It's the management of the here and now, as opposed to necessarily visioning a strategic future. But you can manage projects that have outcomes that contribute to your strategic future. So while I think it's important to understand that it's more operational, it can provide a very critical function to a realization of your strategic future. I also think, without the people that do the projects in the here and now, satisfying, most importantly, your customers, but certainly your other stakeholders, your employees, your vendors, all of the other people that are involved in your organization to make it smoothly running. If you're not making those things happy, you're not going to see a future anyway. So that there won't be a strategic future to shoot for. So I think it's important to remember that the here and now provides a focus so we can get to the future state.
You know, I agree with Andrea. I do think, though, that the problem that comes in is when the projects you're managing or the projects you're working on aren't connected or are disconnected from your strategic strength. So I have an example. This was a few years ago, but I was working with a bank, and they were trying to look at different projects they were doing and seeing where maybe they could pick up some efficiencies and all. And there was one person that I was talking to, and every day he had a ongoing project that he would do. He would work and develop this analysis and report. And he would, when he was done with it, he'd take that report and he'd put it on this desk. And I said to him, "So what happens to that report after you put it on the desk?" He said, "I put it on the desk." And we started asking around, and no one knew what was going on with that report. No one bothered the guy because he was working hard every day. And so they thought that he was doing something for someone. Finally, one night we hung around after everybody left, and we found out that the cleaning crew came through and cleaned off everything that was on that desk and threw it out because no one was at that desk anymore because the person had retired. We also found out that there was actually things in the project he was doing that if you reparsed it out in different ways, it was actually beneficial and it was things that people were looking for. It was actually data that people needed. So I think the key is to remember that what you have to do is to find ways to ensure that the projects you're working on are linked to that future state you're trying to reach.
It sounds like the ham story, Jeff. You've heard of the ham story
Yep,
with the
yep, yep.
the great grandmother, the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter. And why do you cut off the two ends of ham? And the daughter says, "I don't know. My mother always did it." And the mother says, "Well, my mother did it." And the grandmother looks to the great grandmother, and great grandmother says, "Well, I just didn't have a pan that was big enough for the whole ham." So always
Yep.
questioning why you're doing what you're doing, I think is super important. And I think, some organization structure leadership will do 75% of what leadership does on a daily basis is strategic and forward building. And 75% of what management or individual contributors are doing is tactical and day to day in nature. Other organizations, the leadership is doing the tactical day to day, 75% of the day. I think every organization is different. What is clear is that if you don't spend any time on the future, either with the leadership or the leadership getting the managers and the individual contributors involved, if you don't spend that some time looking toward your future and trying to shape it, you're probably going to struggle. I think in the expression, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably get there. So
That's a great point. Thanks, Andrea. So let's go ahead and switch gears and think about executing on the future. So Jeff, help us out with strategy execution.
Sure. I think we need to, first off, be able to think a little bit about the difference between strategy and strategy execution. Lots of organizations have a strategy, and that strategy, is where they want to go in the future, what are their long-term goals, and how does that relate to where they are. It's tied to, having a mission and a vision. However, what happens is if we use an example, let's say, of wanting to build a house, someone could say, I want to build a house. They have plans drawn up. They've got a plot of land picked out. They got financing, and they have some pretty good idea of what they want to do. They have a strategy. But then what happens is they go to try to start building the house, and they had a date they wanted to get it done by, and all of a sudden there's all sorts of things that happen. The materials don't show up, other things go wrong, some of the quality isn't where they want to be, and and they turn out over budget. And so what happens is they didn't execute really effectively at all. And so they had a strategy, but they weren't able to pull all the pieces together to have everything working at the right time and being able to lay out in the right order to be able to build things done. So you've got to be able to do all the parts and have everything come together so that your strategy is able to be realized.
I think the one thing that if you're not thinking about strategy, you know, and you're not thinking about the future and how you're going to get there, the future is going to own you a little bit. I think people have seen this McKinsey study that talked about the average lifespan of the companies on the S&P 500 was 61 years in 1958. And today it's less than 18 years. And they believe that by 2027, 75% of the companies that are currently listed in the S&P 500 today will have disappeared. So I think, while strategy isn't the only reason for that, because the future is moving so quickly, it's prudent to plan for it, and you can plan for it, and you can imagine. So I think it's important for not only properly functioning organizations, but also for your future.
Those are powerful statistics for sure. The house analogy I think is always really helpful. So correct me if I'm wrong, but when we think about that house and the foundation of it, mission, vision, values really come into play for that foundation, right?
Yeah, especially the mission and the values, I would say, because that's really your foundation. The vision is, what do you want the house to look like when
Okay,
it's finally
sure.
done? So yeah,
How do you want to remodel the kitchen?
sure.
Great. That's very helpful to think about. So, again, project management versus strategy execution. Is one more important than the other? And how do you know how to prioritize them?
Well, I think that they're both very important. They're both very relevant, and you need to be able to devote time to both of them. But I think it's also, you got to think about, how do you sequence those different projects along the way, and are you working on the right things at the right time? So I have another example. I worked in an organization where they had a number of projects that were going on at the same time. We were trying to implement an ERP system. We had some initiatives that we were trying to reduce dead stock, and we had 28 locations that we were trying to balance the operations in all those locations. And we had people pushing on each of those projects at the same time. And the problem is that they worked against each other. Until you got the ERP system up and running, you didn't have visibility into the stock, and you really couldn't do much to reduce the stock. And if you had people trying to reduce the dead stock before they had the ERP system up and running, they weren't working on the ERP system. And so, unfortunately, what happened is we really had to try to balance the sequencing. And the person who was incentivized, because that's the other part, there's incentives sometimes, to reduce the dead stock, was pushing ahead, and actually it was working counter to the other things we were trying to do. He ended up losing his job over it, unfortunately, because it really was out of sequence. So when you think about the different projects that are going on, you have to be looking across projects, making sure they all mesh into the strategy, and that they all help move the strategy along in the right time, in the right order, because otherwise they work against each other.
Yeah, I think, strategic planning and project management are both interdependent and interrelated. We tend to focus on project management again because it's not only the here and now and the immediate. I mean, how often do we go off and we hear about these teams that go off and make these beautiful strategic futures for themselves, and then they come back and the Zoom calls start and the emails start, and you're trying to unbury yourself from all these things, and the next thing you know, well, I'll get to that later, because it is later. We tend to focus on the here and now, but both are important. And I think you have to properly properly project manage, say that fast 3 times, initiatives that are strategic for your future to completion. I think that's really where we're going with this interdependence. Mm-hmm. Jeff, I think one of my favorite things about Jeff, and we've worked together for years. When you talked about my teaching MBA course, I taught it with Jeff. We team taught together. We had a great time. I'm not sure if it was the content we had more fun with or the students, but he's a recovering academic, and he's led our team, our strategy team, down a pretty aggressive book reading path. And we just finished a good one, didn't we, Jeff?
Absolutely. We just finished a book called Lead from the Future. And how to turn visionary thinking into breakthrough growth. And I think the book was really neat for a couple of reasons. One was they really encouraged people to think long term. And when I mean long term, 10 years out, 15 years out in some cases, where the trend today seems to be that people are saying, oh, I can't be a strategic more than a year out because guess what? The future is just too unknown. And their argument was if you're not really thinking about potential futures that could be out there 10 years from now, you're going to miss something. You're going to be one of those statistics that Andrea talked about from McKinsey. And I have got a pretty good example of that. Just last Saturday, we were driving with my granddaughter, who's 5 years old, and she was talking about when she gets to drive. And my wife and I looked at her and said, honey, we're not sure you're ever going to drive, at least in the way we drive right now, because by the time you're 16, the cars all may be self-driving. People may not even own cars. There may just be, an app you go and you push a button and all of a sudden a car shows up at your door. There may be all sorts of things that go on. And now if you think about that, you start thinking about that future, think about all the industries that are out there that could be impacted with that. What about the insurance industry if no one needs car insurance the way it is right now? What about the what about police officers? And if you're not going to need the traffic help because if people are all not driving their cars, what about the need for taxis or other sorts of transportation? Does that all go away? And so when you start really thinking about those things, all of a sudden, you can look at your organization and say, well, gee, this makes a really big difference. What about auto repair shops? Do you need those, or do the companies that just own the cars that are driving to your house do all the repairs? There's implications that just go in all sorts of directions that people may not have been thinking about. And if they don't think about them, that doesn't mean those things aren't going to happen. They're still going to happen. They're just going to be unprepared.
Well said, Jeff. Thanks for the recommendation for the book. I will just check in with our audience. If they're, feel free to use the chat. Any other questions for Andrea and Jeff, or any other comments? We'll
Any other
get to those.
comments, or
Yeah, for sure.
I'd love to hear what people are saying and thinking.
So I will move on just as we're waiting for any final questions from our audience. Our Culture of Strategy Execution series does continue next month, and we have two upcoming topics. The first is the enemy of strategy execution, the quarterly fire drill of transformation. We talk about this a lot, right, guys? So
yeah, we
want to bring it to all of you and get your take on it as well. And then our coffee chat for the month of March will be overcoming strategy blind spots. And so I know, Jeff, you've got some thoughts on that, as that's part of your role with our companies, right?
Yep. Nellie, can I make one call out?
Absolutely.
I know on the call I saw, or on the webinar today, I noticed that Victoria's on. Hi, Victoria. Victoria is a former student of mine, one of the brightest students I ever had. So it's nice to see that she's joined the call.
Wonderful. Hi, Victoria. And we should note too, while we started, we did get a few more locations in the chat from warm places. We are starting to warm up in the Midwest with our temperature, so we're sort of still jealous of the warm spots.
Yeah, I don't know if we would be bragging to any of those
Listen,
people necessarily at 32
40
degrees.
40 degrees. I'm excited. I am very excited. So, but on that note, I'll go ahead and continue with just more about our company. So at MPOWR Envision, we develop strategy execution software that helps people achieve their strategic goals and ultimately their strategic plans. Our software creates transparency, alignment, and visibility around your strategy and its execution, which ultimately helps create a culture of strategy execution. In addition to our software, we have a team that include both Andrea and Jeff that provide strategy consulting, facilitation, and coaching. So we'd love to keep this conversation going. We have a lot of other thoughts, a lot of other stories to share. So I encourage you to reach out to Andrea and Jeff. Their information is on your screen. They're both on LinkedIn. And we'd love to help you think through your culture of strategy execution and how we can help you along your strategic journey. So we did want to leave with a question to all of you. Are the projects we are completing relevant to our long-term future, or are they contributing to operational excellence?
And I would add to this, Nellie, and if we're doing both, do we have the right balance? Are we 90-10, and do we need to adjust that balance? If you're not spending good amounts of time on both, you're either not going to have a very good present or you're not going to have a very good future. So you need to pay attention to both.
Absolutely.
Well said. That's a great way to end our conversation today. So Jeff and Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nellie.
And thank everybody for joining.
Thank you very much
Absolutely.
for
I want
joining
to
us today.
also thank Brittany for producing, and thank you. I'll echo what Andrea and Jeff have just said. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time, and we will see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.